and thanks for the opportunity to come by. I thought you might be interested in how I spent my holidays. It was indeed the most unusual holiday season I've ever had. I can't even remember what would come in second place. So what I thought I'd do today is three things. Number one, I thought I'd give you a quick update on my 7th trip to Afghanistan, which I just completed a couple of days ago. Come second, how I spent my holidays. And third, sort of where we go from here on the biggest issue confronting our country, which is the size of our debt and our annual deficits and the threat it all is to the future of the country. With regard to Afghanistan, I don't have to remind you, we went there in 2001 in response to the al-Qaeda attack, and we've been there a long time. And this is the first time, as I said, my 7th trip, the first time I've come back with a sense of optimism that we could achieve what we went there to achieve. And let me remind you of what that was. What we wanted to do was to make sure Afghanistan could no longer be a haven to provide a launching pad for people who want to kill us here. And I can now say, I think pretty confidently, that as we hand over combat operations to the Afghan National Army at the end of 2014, every single general and people down the leadership scale said the same thing in both Kabul and Kandahar, which is that they think the Afghan National Army can handle their internal threats. These guys know how to fight. They've been doing it a long time. The biggest problem was so many of them were illiterate. You know, during the Taliban period, not only were girls not allowed to go to school, a lot of other people weren't too. And so you've got a lot of these young men of fighting age who can't read and write. They can't read the serial number on their weapon. So we've had to teach them basic English. Now, that's not going to be a problem in the future. The Afghan schools have been full now for almost 10 years of boys and girls. You're no longer going to have a whole generation that's illiterate. But they do know how to fight. They've been doing it for the last 30 years, and now they know how to be an army, and they'll be able to handle the Taliban. We will need a residual force, and I hope the President decides to do this, of roughly the following size: 10 to 15,000 Americans. There will be probably another 4,000 or 5,000 British and Australians there for only two purposes, just two purposes: the ongoing training of the Afghan National Army and a counterterrorism capability. And you all know what a counterterrorism capability is. Think of SEAL Team 6, people that can be hauled out for specific strikes against specific targets. But in terms of the control of the population, any kind of regular sort of combat mission, all of our leaders over there believe the Afghans can handle it. So I think this has the potential for a pretty happy ending. Remember, this is not going to be a modern state anywhere in the near future. It's a desperately poor country, but should be able to handle its own internal security and not be a launching pad, again, for people who want to kill us here in America. Number two, with regard to how I spent my holidays, you all followed, I'm sure, with great interest, all of the back and forth leading up to the fiscal cliff. Well, the fiscal cliff, the tax part of the fiscal cliff, was created by the fact that the tax laws were not permanent. If you go back to the Bush tax cuts in 2001, my party supported and implemented a broad tax reduction for all income levels. But because we were unable to get 60 votes in the Senate, which is kind of the threshold to pass permanent law, none of these were permanent. So we've had a number of extensions of the so-called Bush tax cuts, which are now not cuts, they're the current tax rates, over the last 12 years. All of those were coming to an end once again. We've been at a couple of these places before and always negotiated an extension. All of these were coming to an end at the end of this past year. You noticed that the Speaker and the President had seemingly endless discussions about how and whether the President had any flexibility at all on rates above $250,000 a year. To be perfectly frank with you, nobody in my party had any leverage anyway, because at the end of December, all the tax rates were going up by operation of law, automatically. So the question was, could we entice the President into providing tax relief above the $250,000 level? The Speaker had a number of sessions with him over a period of time, and to make a very long story a little bit shorter, by December the 28th, the Friday, I found myself in the Oval Office with the President, the Speaker, Leader Pelosi, and the Majority Leader, and we were running out of time. And the Speaker said what he had already said publicly, which was the House was not going to be able to pass anything, and they would look forward to seeing what the Senate might do. And so the President said, well, Harry, you and Mitch probably ought to talk about this. And so we started. This was a Friday afternoon. New Year's Eve was Monday. And so Harry and I did talk about it until Saturday night, and I made a proposal at 7 p.m. on Saturday night and never got a response. We were into Sunday. They said Harry was at church. I said, that's good, I commend that. So early afternoon, I went to the Senate floor and I said, I don't have a counter proposal. And the Majority Leader said, I don't have one. And I said, I need a dance partner. And so I called the Vice President, and we ended up in an intense discussion on that Sunday afternoon up until 12:45 in the morning, and thought we had an agreement. Then we talked again at 6:30 in the morning, New Year's Eve, and we had a snag, and the snag took us through the afternoon, but we got the snag resolved. Everybody's taxes technically went up at midnight that night. At 2 a.m. on January the 1st, the Senate voted to provide permanent tax relief for 99% of American taxpayers. And the threshold was set at 400 and 450 as opposed to 200. Now, there were some members of my party who thought that, wasn't good enough. I reminded them and remind you, we had no leverage at all. Everybody's taxes were going up automatically, but there were no active hours at midnight, and did, technically. So we felt pretty good about getting permanent tax relief. And the reason I keep coming back to permanency, that means you don't have another incident like New Year's Eve where everything goes up automatically. So we have permanent tax rates for those making 400 and couples making 450. In addition to that, and particularly important to Kentucky, is the death tax, which is a horrible, I've always felt it was the worst experience one could have to visit the IRS and the undertaker on the same day. And of course, the inheritance tax, which we call the death tax, doesn't really have much impact on very high income people. They all put their money in foundations anyway. What it really does is prevent family farms and small businesses from being handed down to the next generation. So what we got was a $5 million exemption and a 40% rate. It was going down to $1 million and up to 55. A $5 million exemption indexed to inflation will protect virtually every small business and family farm in Kentucky from the death tax. So if you're fortunate enough to have a member of your family who wants to continue what you have built, you've now got a very, very good chance of getting that business or family farm down to the next generation. So yeah, I felt good about it. My own view was nobody's taxes needed to go up. We have this problem not because we tax too little, but because we spend way too much. But as one of my colleagues put it, if you got 100 people out there drowning and you can save 99 of them, why would you not do that? And so we did. Now, this issue only settled the tax question. The president wanted $1.6 trillion in new tax revenue. He got $600 billion. So I can tell you, and this is not a negotiating ploy, the tax issue is over. It's over. It's behind us. But there remains, of course, the single biggest problem confronting our future, which is our spending addiction and our massive debt. We now have a $1.4 trillion national debt. It's as big as our economy. That alone makes us look a lot like Greece. I did a one-night stopover in Italy on the way back from Afghanistan, and I was talking to one of our embassy people there, and he said, you know, the biggest problem we have here in Italy is that their debt is 120% of their GDP. I said, well, ours is 100% of our GDP. So the telltale signs are already there. We look a lot like Greece and Italy and Spain. Not some other day, but now. This is the one issue that can keep us from leaving behind for our kids and our grandkids the kind of country that our parents left behind for us. We have tried mightily for the last 3 years to get the president to do the kinds of things we know needs to be done. And let me tell you what needs to be done. It's not complicated, and it's not easy. If you look at what we spend every year, which is way, way too much, we only vote on 40% of it. 60% of what we spend every year is interest on the national debt and very popular entitlement programs. Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. Willie Sutton, the bank robber, was asked one time, why did he rob banks? You may remember his answer. He said, why, that's where the money is. You can't solve this problem on the revenue side. If the president had gotten every bit of revenue he wanted, everything above $250,000, he'd been able to operate the government for about 8 days. It was a great campaign tactic. Let's go out there and sock it to the guy down the street who has more than I do. But that ain't going to solve the problem. We have a spending addiction. You cannot fix the problem on the discretionary side of the budget. There's not enough in defense and foreign affairs and energy and all the education, all the other things we do in the discretionary side of the budget to fix the problem. Everybody knows what needs to be done. What we lack is the courage to do it. Let me tell you what needs to be done. We need to make the entitlement programs fit the demographics of our country. The trustees of the Medicare and Social Security system weren't appointed by me. They were appointed by Barack Obama. Say Medicare's got about 10 years to go, maybe. Social Security has been in the red the last 2 years. That means it paid out more than it took in. Until you adjust prospectively our entitlement programs to the demographics of our country, you can't solve the problem. You probably already know this, but when Social Security was passed in the 1930s, the average American lived to be 61. A pretty good deal for the government for quite a while. This year, the average male will live to be 79, the average female to 81, and that's great. I'm not complaining about that at all, and I'm sure you aren't. The question is, how long does the current generation, for how long can the current generation keep up payments to that many people for that long? So you don't have to change it overnight, and if you're looking for a model of the way to get there, think of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill in 1983 making what at that time appeared to be just a completely toxic decision to raise the age for Social Security. They agreed on a bipartisan basis to raise the age for Social Security to 67 from 65. It's still kicking in some 25, 30 years later. Wasn't done immediately, gradually phased in. That adjustment was not made to Medicare. The Consumer Price Index dramatically overstates inflation. What we ought to do is go to what's called chain CPI, which affects, by the way, both revenue and spending. Chain CPI means that the Consumer Price Index is geared to prices and not wages. And the reason that's what ought to be done is because people who are elderly are buying, but they're not, most of them are not working. By adjusting the CPI to reflect accurately what it ought to reflect, by adjusting the age for Medicare prospectively, you get literally trillions of savings in the out years. And some of you skeptics are probably saying, well, you politicians won't leave it alone. Interestingly enough, when we make changes on the entitlement side, we do leave it alone because we don't vote on it every year. What never gets left alone is the 40% over here, the discretionary budget, that you're sort of messing with every year. The Democrats come in, they have different priorities, they do something different. We come in, we have different priorities. We're always changing it. It's driving you crazy, obviously, on the tax side. Now you've got permanency on the tax side for quite a while to come. But on the entitlement side, if we make these kind of adjustments, I'm pretty darn confident we'll leave it alone. And that's what we've been trying to get the president to do for the last 3 years. So where are we now? There are 3 things coming along that will precipitate this discussion yet again. The sequester has been put off for 2 months. The president has requested us to raise the debt ceiling. And the continued operation of the government comes up at the end of March. So we have 3 opportunities here to get serious one more time about doing something about the only thing that can save our country. And I think I can can speak pretty confidently for Senate Republicans, and actually I believe House Republicans as well. We want to solve the problem. Now, the American people in their wisdom have given us divided government. In fact, the American people seem to like divided government because they've done it most of the time since World War II. And your thought is, well, there's no chance in the world divided government can get the right kind of an outcome. I know it's counterintuitive, but actually divided government is the best time to do tough stuff. I'm going to give you 4 examples. One of them I've already mentioned. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill raised the age for Social Security in 1983. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did the last comprehensive tax reform. We need to do that again. Bill Clinton and the Republicans did welfare reform and actually balanced the budget in the late 90s. So even you probably think, gosh, the Republicans have the House, the Democrats have the Senate and the White House, nothing could possibly happen. Frequently in divided government, big things have happened. Unfortunately, in this divided government, so far, big things haven't happened. And the reason for that is the president has doubled down on the political left and has not moved to the center. And not much will happen if that continues. There's no way you can overstate the significance of whoever is in the White House. There's only one person in America can sign something into law, and only one person in America can deliver the members of his party to support a deal that he makes. And the tax deal a couple of weeks ago is a good example. Leader Pelosi phone banked me for 2 days when I was finally brought into the discussion at the end, saying, oh, you just can't put the death tax in there that you guys want, because if you put the death tax that you guys want, we're going to not be able to get any House Democrats. We hate that. Well, we got the death tax relief that we wanted. The president said, I'm for the deal. You know how many House Democrats voted against it? 16. How many Senate Democrats voted against it? 3. The Democrats will do what the president agrees to, just like in large measure, Republicans did the same with President Bush when he was in the White House. So there's no way to kind of work around the president. I mean, you hear these talks about bipartisan groups of this or that in the House and Senate trying to come up with a grand fix. That's all wonderful, and I'm for that. but you can't get there without the President of the United States, the only person who can sign something into law and deliver the members of his party to vote for it. So here we are again with other points of leverage, maybe. My view is that these last-minute deals are no way to run the government. I don't like being called in at the last minute to try to figure out how to broker some last-minute deal. It's no way to run the government. I've had to do it on 3 occasions during the Obama administration. It's time to quit that. We know these deadlines are here. So what's a better way to do it? Well, we ought to function. You know, the Senate, for example, hadn't passed a budget in 4 years. 4 years? You may or may not know the law says the Senate and House have to pass a budget every year. It doesn't say you don't have to pass a budget if it's hard. It doesn't say you don't have to have a budget if you actually have votes on it. Doesn't say you don't have to have a budget if you have to actually negotiate with the House. Why is it better to have everybody function? You elected all these people. They ought to have a right to amend and debate and participate rather than having a few people, in my case, the Republican leader talking to the vice president, at the very last minute, trying to figure out how to get out of a dilemma that we created for ourselves by, in this case, not making the tax laws permanent in the first place. So I'm disinclined to play that role again. I think we have 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. We have plenty of time here to get to work. But the goal, I repeat before going to your questions, the goal is to save the country. There are a whole lot of issues swirling around. The President's been talking about other issues here lately, I think because he didn't want to talk about this issue. But this is the issue. This is the big one. This is what determines whether or not we have the kind of country for our kids that our parents left behind for us. And the time to deal with it is not some other day, it's now. And I can say for Senate Republicans, we're ready to deal with it, but we don't control the government. In order for there to be the kind of fix to this deficit and debt problem, it has to be done on a bipartisan basis. It will require, absolutely require, the involvement and support of the President of the United States. And that continues to be my goal and will be in the next 2 or 3 months. And with that, I think what I'll do is throw it open and see who'd like to lead off.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your service. One of the things...
Hold that a little closer to your mouth.
Sorry. One of the things that might shed a little more transparency on the spending side is the food stamps, which have increased by 50% in the last 4 years, are part of the agriculture bill.
Yeah.
Is there any way they could be like a food stamp bill and take that out of agriculture? Because it might help, because I think there was some holdup with the agriculture bill this last year anyway.
Yeah, there's just been an astronomical increase in spending on food stamps. I wish I could tell you that was the only example. We've been blowing the lid off across the board. 4 straight years. 4 straight years of trillion-dollar annual deficits. $6.5 trillion added to the national debt in 4 years. Food stamps are one example of it. That's in the discretionary side of the budget. In fact, for those of you who have some involvement in agriculture, 80% of the farm bill is food stamps, not agriculture, food stamps. So, yeah, that's a good example. In the discretionary budget, in the 40% that we actually vote on, which is ballooned as well, yeah, it's outrageous. But I wish I could say that's the only example I could point to. I mean, it's been the $1 trillion stimulus that we passed when the president was in his first year. A massive addition to the debt for little or no return on investment. And yeah, I mean, we have an incredible spending addiction. Good point.
Thank you, Senator. You have mentioned numerous occasions that any long-term solution will require mandate bipartisan agreement, yet you stand firm that taxes are now off the table. I think most Americans think that's unrealistic. How is a long-term solution going to be possible when your position is now that one half of the equation is not even up for discussion?
Well, I wish it were one half of the equation. You may have heard me also say that if the president had gotten everything he wanted, that is rates above 250, it would have paid for the government for 8 days. I mean, the point is, it doesn't have anything serious to do with the problem. This is not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. Now, admittedly, the argument about raising taxes on high-income people must have worked for the president politically, but it's almost totally irrelevant to solving the problem. I'd like to solve the problem. And the other problem you have when you raise taxes too much is you have an impact on the economy. And of course, the worst thing you can do after 4 sluggish years of the economy is make it even worse. So I just don't think, I mean, he has gotten some of the taxes he wanted. He wanted 1.6 trillion, he got 600 billion. He got it by operation of law, not by votes of us. But there isn't going to be any more taxes. And the reason it isn't is not because I'm being unreasonable, it's because it doesn't have anything to do with solving the problem.
How do you get Democratic support?
Well, you know, if we'd actually had an open process in the Senate where the Democrats were actually allowed to participate, I think the threshold wouldn't have been at 400 or 450. I think it would have been well north of 500. Senator Schumer said it ought to be 1 million. So there are plenty of differences on the Democratic side as well. You don't pick up those differences when you're in a kind of last-minute negotiated deal where you're running out of time. But there was plenty of Democratic resistance to doing further revenue increases because a number of them know it's really not going to solve the problem.
Senator, one idea that's been proposed is to reduce government spending 1% a year until the budget is balanced. And that sounds like starting at what we're spending today and just start reducing 1% a year.
I'm not sure I heard the first part of that.
To reduce government spending by 1% per year until the budget balances? Yeah,
I don't know how long it would take to do that, but I think a realistic goal is to try to balance the budget within 10 years. I mean, this is when you've been on the kind of spending spree we have, it is very, very difficult. It's like turning an ocean liner. And you can't ignore any part of the budget, but you certainly can't ignore 60% of what we're spending. Lowering interest payments is helpful. And the way you do that is not have to borrow as much. Changing the trajectory on entitlements is essential. And keeping as much of a cap as you can on the discretionary side is important as well. We spent $3.5 trillion last year. $3.5 trillion. $1 trillion more than we took in. There are plenty of problems in the country you can point to, but none are bigger than this. Erskine Bowles, who was co-chair of the President's Deficit Reduction Commission, said this is the most predictable crisis in American history. And we still haven't done what was needed to do it. I don't know whether 1% a year would be enough or not, but we want to cut spending in a big way. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I have a question. I'm probably the oldest one in the room, Social Security. Why do we think it's an entitlement? Because if I'd had my account, a 401k, I'd have a lot of money today.
Yeah.
Why do we say it's an entitlement?
Well, the reason we use the word entitlement is that if you're eligible for it, you get it automatically by formula. And that's the reason we use the word entitlement. On the discretionary side, it changes every year. You know, you appropriate this much for this process or that. But on these entitlement programs, the spending is tied to existing law. It's automatic. I mean, we don't every year vote on sending out Social Security checks. It's just automatic. So it may be a bit of a confusing term, but that's the reason we use the firm. If you fit the eligibility, you get it.
What are some of the mechanisms available to lower our Medicaid spending? Are we adjusting age eligibility? Are we adjusting copays? What are the
well, I think there's three things that would make sense that help you make the entitlement programs fit the demographics of the country. Adjusting the age to reflect today's lifespan, not the lifespan in the 60s or the 30s. Having serious means testing for high-income people. You know, Warren Buffett is always complaining about not paying enough in taxes. What really irritates the hell out of me is I'm paying for his Social Security and Medicare. You know, billionaires and millionaires shouldn't be treated the same way as others on the entitlement side. And I mentioned the Consumer Price Index, what's typically referred to as the COLA, significantly overstates the cost of living increases. There's an adjustment that can be made called change CPI that shifts that from wages to prices, and that too, in the out years, you know, way on down, gives you very, very dramatic savings. Those are the kinds of things that need to be done. I know the President knows that. We've talked about this. The question is, you know, when are we going to do it? I can't hear you.
What does that mean when you say adjust the age to reflect the demographics of the country? Does that mean raising the eligibility for age for when Medicare begins?
Yeah, I mean, people are living longer now than they were in the 30s and the 60s. Yeah, but you don't do it. You don't do it immediately. You do it like Reagan and Tip O'Neill did with Social Security. It sort of kicks in over a period of time. In fact, I believe the Social Security age is still gradually going up, and this is 30 years or so. I guess it's 30 years this year since the Social Security age was adjusted, but it didn't happen immediately. And I always remind audiences, if you're already that age or if you're about to be that age, you can tune the whole conversation out because it's not about you. It's about your kids and your grandkids and whether the programs are going to be there at all. And I would repeat what I said earlier. The trustees of Medicare and Social Security appointed by Barack Obama say we've got 10 years to go maybe on Medicare. And that Social Security has been in the red the last 2 years. In other words, it's paid out more than it's taken in. So believe me, no action means the demise. I mean, that's what you need to know here. No action means the demise of the nation's safety net, which we all believe in and think is important. No action is not a plan. So that's the point. And those are the kinds of things that could adjust the eligibility to the demographics of America tomorrow, where we're headed. I think I'm sure you agree, great that everybody's living longer and longer and longer and better and better and better. I think that's great. But we have to be able to make sure the programs are still going to be there for future generations. Did we get everybody?
How do you maintain your principles and still compromise to move the country forward? And also, we tell Senator Reid how disappointed and how mean-spirited he comes across sometimes. It's very discouraging to hear him speak about you and fellow Republicans. It's disappointing. Thanks.
Well, I have been involved in the three biggest compromises in the Barack Obama administration, so obviously I don't object to compromise. The Constitution itself was a series of compromises. So I don't believe compromise is a bad word. We all do it in our daily lives, and it is a little bit harder, obviously, when you have different points of view. That's what you end up having in divided government. But I've been a part of the three biggest compromises of the Barack Obama administration. The 2010 decision to extend the Bush tax cuts for 2 years, the August 2011 Budget Control Act, which reduced the discretionary side of the budget by $1.2 trillion over 10 years, and the tax deal 2 weeks ago. So I obviously don't have some kind of Pavlovian negative response to compromise. A good compromise is one in which both sides feel a little bit uncomfortable and both sides feel like they got something worth doing. And I'm open to that. But I would like to see us fix the country. And there are a whole lot of issues swirling around. You get them thrown at you every day on one issue or another. There's only one issue that fixes the country. Only one thing can save the country, and that's to get a handle on this deficit and debt issue. That's the mega issue. There are all these other issues out there that are important to this group or that group or some other group. But you want to fix the country and make sure that we have the same kind of country for our kids and our grandkids. You got to fix this one. And what I'm telling you is I'm ready to do it. I've been ready to do it from the beginning of the Obama administration. I've been involved in multiple discussions, but we haven't been able to get there yet. And I hope there'll be an opportunity to do that here in the next 3 months, because we have a series of deadlines before us that tend to be what it takes to get us to act, is to have some kind of deadline. My view is, let's get about it.
I have a question. With that comment, here I am. How can we as citizens help you with that goal?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the vast majority of Americans are, frankly, just completely exasperated with Congress. I read the other day we had a 10% approval rating. I want you to know I'm not in that 10% myself, and I think people don't like the lack of results. And to me, that goes beyond whether your inclinations are Democratic or Republican. You'd like to see results. When the American people choose to have divided government, that means if you're going to get a result, neither side can totally get it their way. And as I said, I've been the leader of the minority, not the majority, for the last few years, and been involved in the three major negotiations that have led to passing something with this administration. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I'd love to be at a signing ceremony with the President of the United States where we actually fixed the problem. And believe me, we both know what the problem is, and it's what I've been telling you. Until you make the very popular entitlement programs fit the demographics of America, you can't fix the problem. There's not enough revenue to get it done. It's not enough on the discretionary side of the budget, the 40%, not enough there to get it done. You have got to deal with this. Look at Europe. I mean, that's the fundamental problem in Europe. They're a little bit ahead of us, but not a long way ahead of us, with the very same problems. The very same problems. The safety net is so broad, so expansive, it includes so many people, that they don't have enough productive people to pick up the tab for it. So what do? You keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and there's a bailout here and a bailout there, and pretty soon nobody's left to bail you out. We're on the same path. And I think the time to fix it is now. And you elect all of us to go up there and try to do the best we can to fix the nation's problems. And all I can tell you is I'm going to do my part. I've done that on 3 occasions during this administration, and I would do it again if I had the opportunity to. And I'm hopeful that sooner or later we're going to have what I would call adult behavior across the entire room and get this behind us.
We're out of time.
Okay. Well, look, let me. I'm afraid I've left you on too sober a note. Let me say this about this country. Look, we always somehow, some way, manage to fix our problems. I'm endlessly optimistic about America's ability to adapt to whatever the crisis is at the moment. You know, whether it was 9/11 or the Civil War, you name it. I mean, we have always been able to rise to the occasion. I do want you to know that when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top military person in the current administration, was asked in a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee a year and a half ago, what was the biggest national security threat to the United States? He said, the debt. The top military guy didn't say Al-Qaeda. He didn't say Iran. He said the debt. So this is the mega issue of our time. And the time to fix it is now. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.